In this video, we'll be running through the only 3 retargeting audiences that actually matter. All of this hyper-segmentation, targeting add to carts, targeting people that are on second purchase, all of that stuff doesn't work. It doesn't give you increased profitability. This is the way that you make the most amount of money possible through a retargeting campaign. For 90% of people watching this, all they need is audience 1. You don't need anything more. For 10% of people watching this, you need audience 2 as well. And then there's a very minute amount of people as well, and this is going to translate to agencies and performance marketers watching this who work across a lot of accounts. There's going to be instances where you want a third audience too. But this is all that matters. And the reason why this is all that matters, I will explain as we start to go through them. And so, starting off at number 1. Number 1 is a 90-day visitor audience. This is all 90% of brands need. You don't need to do any retargeting outside of just this audience. And the reason for that is because when you go and segment down to add to carts, or you go and segment down to initiate checkouts, or people that have visited a particular collection, what you are doing is cutting down the size of your custom audience. Why is that important? When you do retargeting, one of the biggest components of your CPM, your cost to serve ads, is the size of the audience. Now, this isn't true for cold audiences. And to only think about this in retargeting, with cold targeting, it's a completely different story. CPMs work in a different dynamic. But on retargeting, that is the biggest predictor of CPMs. If you go into the account right now and you launch a new ad set to a really small audience, your CPMs are going to go through the roof. If you go and launch a 90-day visitor audience, your CPMs are going to be really low. In fact, you can go in there and you can launch a 180-day visitor audience and your CPMs are going to be even lower. And so if we're just optimizing purely for the lowest CPMs, I'd go and put 180 days in here. Now, personally, we normally restrict to 90. And the reason for that is anyone past a 90-day visitor has probably lapsed and is no longer categorically warm. And so we want to pull the targeting out of the campaign. But there is a really strong argument that that doesn't even matter. And the reason why that doesn't even matter is because Meta is still optimizing within this audience. And what it's going to do is realize that the people that are most likely to purchase in the audience are the ones that enter. So the ones that have just entered into this audience, so they visited the website within the past few hours or the past few days, that's where all the conversions come from. And so the campaign is going to automatically go and distribute all of the budget to just anyone within the first 7 to 10 days of visiting the website. And so even though it's categorically a 90-day visitor audience, it isn't really. Majority of your budget is just going to any new user entering. And so I think there's a pretty solid argument there that you could just take this out to 180 and it would make no difference. In fact, you just get a CPM drop and see better performance because it's costing less to serve to users. So why don't you go and add in an add to cart audience? Why don't you go and add in people that have visited a specific collection? Why don't you do this level of hyper segmentation and have multiple ad sets? The reason why is threefold. Number 1, match rates on Meta aren't that good. And so you go and make an add to cart audience, you're only going to pick up 60, 70% of people that actually added to cart. Number 2, CPMs are going to go through the roof. When you go and target an add to cart audience, unless you're a 9-figure brand with massive volume, it's a pretty small audience size. Meta's going to charge you accordingly. And then with that CPM kind of leads into number 3, which is that ROAS, MER, efficiency, ROI is going to be worse. And it's going to be worse because this CPM premium that you paid to delineate the audience down, let's say it's 20%, you have to beat that 20% just to break even with a better offering to add to cart audiences. The biggest mistake I see all the time is people do this level of segmentation. They segment everything out, and then they just serve the same ads. What's the point? Why don't we just consolidate and pay less? Why are we segmenting? Maybe because we can have some ability to visualize the data and we can see where the attribution is. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter if you have a high ROAS on add to cart retargeting versus visitor retargeting. Because what are you going to do with it? Nothing. There's nothing to action off the back of that. You're not going to stop retargeting 90-day visitors. You're not going to spend more on add to cart retargeting because your frequency is already probably at 15 to 20, which is way too high anyway. And so there's no direct action item off the back of it. So then there's no point in running the structure at all. There's no point in even collecting that data if there's nothing you can do with it. And so if you are going to hyper-segment, you want to change the assets that are being presented within the messaging. And so if you've added to cart, you might want to go more heavy on some kind of messaging around the shipping rate. because people added to cart, they didn't buy. What stopped them in that funnel? Well, we actually have quite high shipping rates. So maybe we come in with a free shipping code, we have some kind of free shipping discount, or we re-emphasize the value of the product in association with shipping. Maybe we have some kind of clever messaging around, we collect shipping because of XYZ or something like that. Now that could work. And yeah, that might actually bump the return on ad spend of serving that ad to that particular audience by 20%. But even still, we're only breaking even here because we're paying 20% more to do it. We're getting a 20% ROI bump. And if we're putting an offer in there, we're going to lose margin. And so not only do we need a 20% ROI bump, we might need a 30 or a 40 just to break even because we've actually had margin loss. Makes absolutely no sense. Don't do it. Just run a 90-day audience. You're going to get better results. Okay, what's the second option? Well, the second option is retargeting existing customers who have lapsed. For majority of brands watching this, I'm going to assume it's not just 9 and 8-figure brands watching these videos. I'm going to assume that this isn't applicable to most people. And the reason it's not applicable is because paid media's job isn't to drive existing customer revenue. There are much better communication channels and levers within the business to do that. Anytime you go and crank a bunch of spend into existing customers, you'll very rarely ever see a material change in returning customer revenue. It just doesn't really work that effectively. But there are caveats. Caveat number 1, if you have high product, I'm going to call it turnover here, but it just means, are you launching a lot of products? So if you're in fashion and you have a new drop every 2 weeks, we want to get that in front of people. Now we're going to get that in front of people through email, SMS, organics, which are way better communication channels with our existing customers. But yeah, we probably want a bit of paid media spend behind it. We probably want to serve to those people that maybe don't check their emails, don't follow us on organics, etc. Makes complete sense. And so we want a small allocation there. We don't want a big allocation, but we want something just so we're getting those impressions. And then the other thing we want is, well, what about, I'm making an argument here that people that subscribe to email and SMS are much more likely to buy through there than buy through retargeting on the Meta platform, which is undoubtedly true. But what if they've unsubscribed? And what if they don't follow us on Instagram or Facebook? Well, why are they going to come back? Well, if it's a consumable, they might just come and return buy. If they like the brand, but they just don't want to be bombarded with our messaging all the time, they might just come back and buy. And so there's a bunch of people here that are just going to come back and buy regardless of ads. But I see a good argument to where, hey, like we should probably target these people through paid media with a restrictive spend, maintaining frequency in a reasonable position. Sure. And so you can take your unsubscribed list and you can sync that straight into Meta and you can target those people. I think that's actually quite a good idea. The issue is targeting these people on an ongoing basis for a brand that's doing under 60 million in direct consumer. I don't really see this being a good allocation of spend unless you have, once again, really high product turnover. Why? Because if you're sitting at like a 5 frequency on this audience, that means that every person that's unsubscribed is seeing your ads 5 times every single month for perpetuity. Why would you do that? That just seems like way too much overspend. And so if you are going to do this, this seems like something seasonal that you would bring in when you have a unique offer or a unique product. You would bring this audience in, or you would turn it off and on once a quarter to re-engage these particular audiences, or you would just run it at a way lower budget. The same thing applies for lapsed customers. And so you want to do some kind of calculation that determines whether a customer is lapsed or not. You can use internal tooling. You can use Klaviyo's tooling and just go define lapsed customers for me and sync that audience. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. But you want to then go and target lapsed customers. I wouldn't really spend on non-lapsed customers, people that are still engaged in purchasing from you and follow your Instagram and are subscribed on the email list. It's just going to be wasted spend. Like the reality is, yes, are you going to see an incremental lift in purchases? Probably. Like you might see 5, 10 more purchases, but how much are you going to spend to get that? $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. You're not going to make money on that exchange. And so even though there is incrementality in the conversion figure or the revenue figure, doesn't necessarily mean it's a profitable exercise. And so option number 3 here, in my opinion, is you want to keep budget allocation on the Meta platform sub 5% to some kind of existing customer audience that is lapsed, not just all existing customers. Define it down, and you might go, well, you're going to get a CPM premium, and you you're going to pay a little bit of a CPM premium. But I would argue that if you have such a low budget, you just want to concentrate it into users that actually matter and not just waste spend on retargeting users that are going to purchase regardless. And then the other option here is unsubscribed users. And so you can also go after unsubscribed users. But if you're going to do that, I'd recommend that it's a seasonal introduction and you're not just consistently running it all year round. It's just so much spend for an audience that, in my opinion, can't validate it. And then we have a third one. This doesn't apply to 99% of the people watching this. I hope there isn't a massive drop-off rate and it stops the reach of this video. It's an interesting one, so you may as well watch this, which is that if you're big, Australia, I'm going to classify big as spending over $150,000 in the geo. US, increase that to $400,000 a month. At that stage, you're likely going to introduce a small budget allocation. 2 to 3% of your budget is going to go into some kind of reach campaign. And that reach campaign, in my opinion, should include pretty much exclusively video assets. And the reason why it should exclusively include video assets is because you can run view-through optimization, which works. I can't believe how well it works because you get about 50% view-throughs from anyone that gets served your ads. So you're just getting massive amounts of complete view-throughs on your video content. So that's great. But number two is that you can follow up with these users, which is the actual audience that I'm about to tell you, on anyone that was a 75% video viewer. You can flex this depending on your view-through rate and the duration of the videos that you're serving in the campaign. So you could take this 25, you could take 50, you could take 75. You could be aggressive and take it 90 if you have really large budgets, which in this case you would. So I'd keep it higher than lower. And you can retarget these guys with some kind of direct response marketing offer. Because this audience is going to get warmed up through your reach campaigns, and then you can follow up with them with conversion-based campaigns. Once again, this is inapplicable to majority of brands watching this, but for the few that are doing a lot of revenue, definitely go and test that out. Also reach out to us and we'll do a free audit. But they're the only audiences that matter. Number one, 90-day visitor audience. Anyone that argues elsewhere, give them the arguments I just went through. Number two is targeting lapsed existing customers, and you want to keep budget allocation here really small. And if you prove me otherwise, go and take this up to 20% and see what happens. Measure the incremental lift in returning customer revenue, see if it's applicable. It won't be. And then number three, for the massive brands out there, video view retargeting on reach campaigns, generally a good idea if you actually want those reach campaigns to have some kind of impact.